So hello everyone, and thank you for downloading this podcast. My name's Tim. I'm part of the leadership team here at Amblecote. And today in this podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit about pregnancy loss through abortion, through miscarriage, and through stillbirth. We are filming this, we're on Zoom. So you might be able to see us, or you might be listening, just listening, whether you're running along or whether you're on a journey. It's great to have you on board, and we hope that this is really helpful. I'm joined today by the wonderful Jenny Baines. Some of you will have heard Jenny before. Jenny works for an organisation called Open, who are part of CARE, Christian Action, Research and Education. And Jenny has been involved for over 20 years with those affected by unintended pregnancy and post-abortion concern. She works now to support churches in providing a pastoral response to pregnancy loss. And really, I suppose we've been on a journey as a church with an aim to become a place of welcome and healing for all of those who have experienced baby loss in whatever way. And Jenny has been a great fellow journey person in that. She's been journeying with us on that. She provided some training for some of our pastoral team a while ago. She's spoken at one of our Sunday mornings, and it's a real joy to have you with us today, Jenny. Thanks for making the time.
It's great to be with you, Tim. Thank you.
So, Jenny, really, I'm going to be sort of probing you with a bunch of questions, and it's kind of poignant. We're going to be putting this podcast out around Awareness Week. So we're hoping that we're going to have a bunch of resources for those who are affected by this, but also maybe those that want to support those who have faced or are facing baby loss. And what I want to do is split the podcast into two parts. So the first part, we're going to talk mainly around those who have personally been affected or experienced baby loss. Again, whether that's through abortion or miscarriage or through stillbirth. And then in the second part, we're going to shift a little bit and talk about the church really and how we can become that place of welcome and support, which I know that you've got a heart for and a passion for to help churches do that. So I will let you do most of the talking and try to keep quiet.
That could be dangerous, Tim.
Well, dangerous on my part as well from me. I'll try and, so first of all, Jenny, remind us who you are. What you do and some of your own personal experience around this.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be here, and as you've given me a great introduction there. It's actually over 30 years, I think, since I first became involved in this work of walking alongside those who've experienced baby loss and crisis pregnancy and loss, struggled through abortion. So it's quite a wide area of work, but it's been a real privilege. My late husband was a Baptist pastor. And as part of the ministry of our church, we had a pregnancy advice centre in the town, which was wonderful. And we were able to reach out there to those who were in either a crisis pregnancy or had experienced baby loss. And we still really need to be in the community. But as you say, my heart at the moment, I've been on a journey myself, and I feel really challenged to engage with churches on this issue because sometimes we're just not so good at talking about it. And miscarriage and stillbirth and abortion, they can be kind of taboo subjects almost that very often we don't talk about in our church context. And so it can be a lonely silence for many people. And so my work really is helping churches, as you've said, and it's been great working with Amblecote, just delivering pastoral training sessions. We offer healing retreats, which we'll probably talk a little bit about, and helping get churches really to open up the subject. It's not to enlist people to campaign. It's nothing to do with that. It's actually encouraging a pastoral response to those who may have been affected by these experiences.
And it's been really great, and thank you for your input into our local community here, our church family, because I think to speak about these kind of topics which are very personal, painful, but to speak about them well is really important. And I think you do that really well. So maybe there's those listening to this who have personally experienced baby loss, or people who know people who have experienced that. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what they might be experiencing their lives as a result of experiencing baby loss or pregnancy loss.
Well, of course, everyone's experience of loss is individual, isn't it? And we all go through different processes. I'm going to talk in a little while, just that I came into this work through my own experience. I had 3 miscarriages, which is how I came into this whole area of work. But it can be, I think, for those who've experienced pregnancy loss, as I've already said, it can be a lonely place because we don't share about it much. And just a quote I read once, miscarriage has been described as the word we don't say until it happens. And I think that can be so true. And so many times people have said once they've shared that they've had a miscarriage, everybody seems to have had one, but none of us talk about it. And yet in the UK, 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage and baby loss. And so there will be people in our churches who've experienced this. And yet we don't find it easy to talk about it. And I'm often asked why that is. And I think maybe for some, if the loss is very early on in the pregnancy, maybe other friends, people just didn't even know that the lady was pregnant. And in our Western culture, I think sometimes we're not good at addressing grief and we don't know what to say. Although it's been so interesting this week, we've had the mourning of the Queen and all the grief being outpoured. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? And people, I think, have been taken aback by the grief that this has triggered. And I think that can be the same for somebody who's lost a baby, that they're carrying this grief and yet really haven't had the opportunity maybe to process it and to express it. But for all people, those that have lost a baby, whether early on in the pregnancy or later, actually that loss is a loss of all the potential and all the dreams that they had for that baby. So there's a huge sense of loss. I think when I had my miscarriages over 30 years ago now, when I share about it, I say that physically the whole process was horrible. I think miscarriage is a horrible experience, and it was just horrible. And then the emotions that went along with it were really deep and painful, and I think take us unawares probably. So during my second miscarriage, especially, I just was overwhelmed with grief and with sobbing and weeping. I physically couldn't stop crying, and however hard I try. And then there were the questions which I think a lot of people who've been through pregnancy loss ask, was it something that I did? Why is this happening to me? What is wrong with me? What can't I do this? And that can cause a feeling of guilt. I think a lot of women feel guilt. And then even shame. I think in miscarriage or indeed in abortion, which we'll address a little bit later, there can be that sense of shame. Well, why couldn't I do this? And so I had to work through a lot of those feelings and eventually come to a place of kind of acceptance and of placing, for me, my babies into God's hands, really, and the sadness, not letting go of them in a sense, but just releasing the sadness. And for me, I knew and I believe that my babies were in God's presence, but that's a long process.
That doesn't happen overnight. It
doesn't. And grief, we often talk about grief, that sometimes it's something that's actually always with you and probably the same size, but our lives build around it. And so I think a lot of what I'm doing is really helping men and women to process the grief so that it can be dealt with in a healthy way and enabling them to move on. But that will always be part of our story. So I think, a lot of emotions,
I guess one of the challenges you've already sort of alluded to is that often people are going through this on their own. And there may be those listening who have great friends and connections who are able, and that's fantastic in it, if people are able to talk about it, work through it, maybe with someone who's a little wiser, or or has some experience. That can be a blessing. But we know, don't we, that lots and lots of people are walking through this and maybe haven't told anyone or are very, very alone in this.
It's true. And I think sometimes there can be an expectation from others. They want to make it better for you, and almost can't even understand why you're still struggling with this, as if suddenly it's going to go away, and it's another subject for a seminar, but some of the things we say aren't really helpful. And yet really, I think what most women and men want to do is just to talk about their babies,
Maybe we'll come back to that about what's to say and what not to say, because I think that's really helpful when we talk about how we become a church that's welcoming and part of a healing process for someone. So I think that's a good mention there. I didn't spot that one in my sort of prep. But maybe tell us a little bit about, in your work, have you seen differences? We talk about pregnancy loss, and I think it's helpful for us to talk about abortion, miscarriage and stillbirth.
Yeah.
But we recognise, don't we, that they're three different experiences and three different things that people walk through. Have you seen the impact of those? Are the things that are similar? Are the things that are different? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said, it was because of my own miscarriage experiences. After I'd lost these 3 babies, I began to think, why was I so affected and why was I so grieving when, for me, my babies didn't go beyond a 12-week gestation? And so that started me off on a journey of thinking about it and very much wanting to reach out and work with those who've had miscarriage. But also I began to realise that those who've had abortions, some of the effects afterwards, there are so many similarities. And I have to say that's what brought me into the majority of my work has been with working with women who've either faced a crisis pregnancy or abortion. So a lot of those feelings, I think the feelings of anger and of guilt, I think probably even more deeply, so for some, not everybody, but those who seek our help, for some, there's that sense of shame. And after all, they made this decision. Maybe it was probably hugely, for most women, it's such a difficult decision to make, but all sorts of feelings that accompany that. And actually, for those who've had abortions, feeling as well this huge sense of loss. But sometimes women, they just think, I'm feeling this, but why am I feeling it? They didn't expect that this would happen. And it's very complex. You know, abortion is legal in our country, can sometimes be seen as being such a simple procedure. And so some women very often are deeply affected and surprised by the depth of the emotions that they feel afterwards. So I think there are a lot of similarities, and some of the miscarriage work we do in the post-abortion, the retreats that we run, a lot of the discussion is the same, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about the experiences, you know, I think it's important we recognise these are individuals.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, we're complex, aren't we? The way we're made. I remember you saying once in one of the sessions, you know, there will be those that don't feel anything, and maybe they feel guilty because they don't actually feel some of the emotion. And we're talking about all this, and maybe they think, you know, I feel okay. Is that bad? Is that wrong? And so I think, do you think it's okay just to acknowledge how you feel is how you feel, and that's okay, you know?
Absolutely. And even with that, I know we use this word a lot, but I think that's a process. And I know that some we hold post-abortion healing retreat weekends, and some women that come, that very often in their 50s or 60s, and for years they buried this experience so deep, and then something happened to trigger the grief or the feelings. And so I think that it can be a process, you know, and sometimes initially they might feel they weren't affected at all, but when they explore and review their life, if you like, they can see that actually it did have an impact. I mean, it's just come to my mind. I hope it's okay to mention this, but I don't know if you, Anne Robinson was, with all that's been going on in the States with the Roe v. Wade changes of legislation, Anne Robinson was on Woman's Hour just a few weeks ago now, and it's no secret, she shared before that she had an abortion in her 20s, and she was very much a campaigner pro-abortion, a campaigner for women's rights, but she shares now how she has been so deeply affected by it in a very actually very poignant way. And actually said on this you can find it at Woman's Hour podcast, that actually if she was in that position again, knowing what she knows now, she would not have made that decision. So it's interesting. And again, sometimes there are women who seem not to be affected, but those that we find, obviously, because they come to us for help, it can come at different stages.
And you've talked a lot about women there, but we recognise that men are also involved in that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And so with abortion and with miscarriage, I think with miscarriage very much, I've just been preparing a session about men and miscarriage, and I think for them, they experience these same emotions very often, and yet, sorry Tim, this is a bit of a generalization, but sometimes I think men process things in different ways. I think they don't find it, not all of them, but the majority don't find it so easy to express their emotions. And for a lot of men, I think they feel with a miscarriage, baby loss, stillbirth experience, that they can be pushed out of the situation a little bit. That's that their feelings are almost overlooked by everybody else, and they see their role as looking after their partner and helping life carry on, as it was the practical aspects. But actually, deep down, they also have these emotions, deep emotions, which need to be explored. Somebody, I wrote it down somewhere, said it's almost like it's a woman that has no. Let me find the quote if I can just find that. Somebody just read it was as if having a baby was a couple thing, but having a miscarriage was just for women.
Wow.
I read that just this week, and I just think that is so true. And so we need to be aware and talk to the guys, and have provision for them to share as well. But it probably would be in a different way.
And I think that's why we'll come on to church, but this is why this work is so important, so that we begin to continue and begin and increasingly talk about these things, so it becomes normal to express. And like you said, people will do that in different ways, but that becomes part of our general way of approaching life, that we talk about this as part of life, because it is, isn't it, for so many people?
Absolutely.
So we know that you do retreats and work to try and come alongside those who've experienced pregnancy loss. It'd be great to hear some of the stories of healing, really. We've talked about some of the challenges, what about those who've been through some of this process and have seen healing, whether God do some things in their life, or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with miscarriage, we offer miscarriage healing retreat days, and also something I've been very involved with, and we've got 2 services coming up next month, is holding baby remembrance services. And I think events like that can be so significant for those that have experienced baby loss. Just with miscarriage, I remember once, actually a few years ago now, we had a baby remembrance service. And there was a lady there in her 70s. And as she left, she shook her hand, and her face was beaming, actually. And she said, I know that tonight I'm going to sleep for the first time in over 50 years, because I know that my baby's in God's presence. Wow. And actually, she'd been raised in the Catholic Church, where at that time, they don't have it now, I think, but they had this doctrine of, now the word's gone out of my mind, limbo, where they believed that they weren't sure where babies were who'd been lost through pregnancy loss. And that's something that she just didn't know where her baby was. But I know now that my baby is in God's presence. And I've seen women come on the retreats and it's just in the sharing, to be honest, the sharing with other people who've been through the same experience, and just beginning to talk and to have their babies acknowledged, that they existed. And I think that can be one of the challenges, but that can be so helpful in healing. I mean, it is a process, but I think they just walk a little bit lighter, having worked through that and just carrying this experience with them into life, but moving on. And with abortion, I mustn't talk for too long, but I could, several stories. And one lady came to mind. It was in a large multicultural church I was working, and we offered a post-abortion healing group. So we met every week. And this lady, when she first approached me with tears running down her face, Jenny, I really want to come, but I can't do it in a group. She just had this sense of shame, Tim. And if other people in the church knew what I'd done, can I do it one-to-one? And I just said, well, you could, but trust me, I really believe that in a group is really helpful. So she came and she worked through her grief. Now, she and her husband had been around in the church for a long time, had a beautiful home, but would never offer their home for anything. And she said to me once, I just felt that if people knew what I'd done, they wouldn't want to come. And it's this deep sense of shame and grief. It's so deep. But she worked through and came to a place of healing and of acknowledging God's forgiveness and forgiving herself and all those things that we work through. And now she is one of the main members of staff on that big staff team. She is one of the ones in leadership. The home is being used all the time because she actually felt that she was released from all that stuff that she'd been carrying for years. And I could go on and on. Somebody else who was on one of those groups, and anger. She was really an angry person. But through looking at her abortion experience and the journey afterwards, realized that she needed to let go of that anger, and God moved and sort of released her from that anger. So many stories we could tell, but just, and it's wonderful. It's such a privilege to walk alongside people through that journey. Very courageous thing.
Yeah.
do, but actually the result, the healing is, and again, in different measures for different people. We're all individuals, but
I think it's important to share those stories, because I think so often when we're facing our own emotions, our own challenges, our own fears, our loneliness, it can feel like we're trapped and there is no way out. This is so I think to hear that somebody else has been through a similar experience but come to some measure of healing in whatever way can, I suppose what I hope is that those listening to this will think, maybe, just maybe, that could be me.
Absolutely.
Maybe. And it sort of give that sense of hope, that light, that maybe could change. And I think you must have seen that a number of times. I'm sure you can share story after story.
Yeah, I always say with all the, I'm getting really old now, Tim, so I've been a follower of Jesus for a long time. And I just think, but with all the ministry that I've done with my husband and then other things, this is the thing that I always say is the most really humbling, rewarding, and just such a privilege, to bring people into that healing.
Yeah. So maybe there's someone listening to this who has experienced baby loss in their own journey. They might be thinking, fantastic, what do I do then? Where do I go? How do I get help? How do I reach out? How do I talk about this? What could they do?
Yeah, well, I think, as we've already said, it's so good that we have Baby Loss Awareness Week now. And I think in that week, there will be people thinking, what can I do? This is me. And it gives them the opportunity to remember their babies. But there are pregnancy advice centres all over the UK. I know there was one in your area. I'm not quite sure where we're at with that at the moment, actually, but there are centres all over the UK. There's a network of Christian pregnancy centres called Pregnancy Centres Network. And maybe we can put up information afterwards, or with their website. And they would offer miscarriage counselling and post-abortion counselling, and indeed crisis pregnancy counselling. So for somebody having to make that choice, they are all over the country, so anyone can seek those out, and they're very welcoming places. I would just say as well, I find the Miscarriage Association, they have a brilliant website, lots of information on there. So anybody wanting to know about miscarriage, about the effects men and a miscarriage, just do have a look at that. Lots of books around. I've got a whole pile here. We won't go through them all, but I have some here. and they're being produced. There's new ones coming out. When I had mine, there was hardly anything around, and there's some really great books. So again, if anybody wants to email at the end, I can give information about that. And there's a new one just come out by a guy called Eric Schumacher, which is especially for men, which is really good. It's a biblical devotional, but a really nice book. So there are resources out there. So do get in touch with us about that. And then we do have just do a plug here now, we have our loved Miscarriage Healing Retreat days, where it's generally women. When there are men, we do that in a smaller context, but women come for the day and we just share about experiences that we have in common. So those emotions we've already talked about. And at the end of the day, we put everything aside and we set out and we have a small service to remember our babies. And it's just so, they're such wonderful, wonderful days. And then we have the post-abortion healing retreat weekends. So any of those things, if anybody wants to know, please, to contact me. We would love to. There's a lot of help out there now.
And what we'll do, Jenny, is we'll get a load of links off you and things like that, and we'll put them in the newsletter to follow this, so people can chase those things up if they want to. We have, just thinking about the local, you asked there about local, there's definitely a heart and a passion to, so we did have a pregnancy crisis support centre a number of years ago that closed, and there is a heart to see that relaunched. We do have, if you specifically listen to this and you're part of Amblecote, at the back of the hall there is a board which has some contacts. So Still Waters is a centre in Birmingham that you can connect into, and there's other sort of leaflets there with some support. So there are things out there, but we'll definitely get all of that information that you've just given there, and maybe put some links to some books and things like that for people.
I'll send them over.
Brilliant, thanks, Jenny. So let's talk a bit about the church then. Your passion, and certainly my passion definitely, is that the church can become this place of welcome and healing where we sort of don't know how to phrase that, we start talking, you know, and stop it being a taboo. That's kind of a taboo subject that isn't spoken about. And that's, I think, both of our one of our passions. So I guess my first thing to wrestle with here, and this is a bit of a wrestle, if that's okay, is that I think sometimes the things that we believe themselves can become a barrier. So I know that there are people who think, I could never go into a church because they believe X, you know, they believe abortion is wrong or whatever, and therefore I will not be accepted there. So it's almost like the beliefs that we hold, or the things that we teach even, can in themselves sort of create a sense of the church isn't for me, really. Now we know, and our passion is that this is exactly where, you know, Jesus spent his time with those that felt they weren't accepted, that those that felt that they weren't part of the religious elite or whatever. That's where Jesus went. So how do you think we, you know, how do we become that place of welcome, and how do we hold that tension of truth and grace that we still teach into the sort of the value of life, and that God creates each human being special and individual and all those things, and yet a place of welcome and grace and love and support for those who are faced, particularly thinking maybe of abortion, which we, you know, sort of seems to fly in the tension. A bit of the tension.
Well, I think that could be a whole podcast in itself.
You do that in 5 minutes, that'd be great.
Of teaching. And I think always, I mean, this has been part of my journey, you know, that always, as you say, we carry that tension between grace and truth. And we do a whole session when we're doing training of talking about compassion and boundaries. And actually, we want to be that church where women and partners and men can come in knowing that they've had an abortion experience and they will be accepted. And yet we don't want to, but we still want to tell the truth. And as you said, all those, you know, we believe that life is incredibly precious and we're created in God's image. And my belief is that it's very old fashioned, I know, but that, you know, the 10 Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount, these teachings and the boundaries that are in God's word, I mean, God put them there for our protection and for our well-being, you know, not to spoil our fun. And I think that when women, in the case of abortion, I think that a lot of women, those that struggle, not everybody, but those we meet and those that struggle, they have a value system. And if they go across their value system in choosing to end the life of their babies, there can then be all sorts of struggles that follow. And we call that sort of post-abortion syndrome, and struggles that follow, because they've gone across that value system. And so for us, we're not doing any favors, I don't think, if we just teach about the compassion. And yes, that's okay to do that, because actually we're not, they still carry that sense of shame and struggle with the values, but we want to uphold the truth, but within the boundary, if you like, of God's compassion. We don't want to become like the Pharisees, who sort of put burdens on people that they just couldn't bear, you know, they were too heavy for them. And so it is a tension, but I think we can work towards doing that in a really good way. And I think we're doing some of that today by just opening up this conversation and talking about it, by letting people know that everyone, of course, whatever, is welcome in our church family. I think one of my things is that we need to be very careful of the language that we use. And I think sometimes, especially across the pond, probably, but we hear sometimes abortion spoken in such a horrible, condemnatory way, and the language is not very nice. And so there are ways that we can talk about abortion and pregnancy loss with that, being careful of the language. You would never, ever hear me saying abortion is murder. We can talk about ending the life of a child. It means exactly the same, but it's not rubbing salt in the wound for those that are listening to it. So I do believe we can present God's truth, but within his compassion. And, you know, I think what we need to be letting people know in our churches and just in our circle of friends and communities, that we all have regrets. I speak a bit about this. We all have decisions maybe that we've made that we wish we could go back and perhaps do things a bit differently. And that's not saying that what happened was right, but it's saying that very often we're human, we make decisions with the information that we have at the time. Very often women make a decision for an abortion and then they come to know Jesus in their lives, and somehow thinking begins to change, and they can be very hard on themselves. I think, how could I have made that decision? But, I don't believe God judges or condemns us. We did what we did with what we had at the time, but God can reveal his light and just show us different values. And I think really we have a supreme example. I will stop then. But as you said, but in Jesus, and the way that he accepted the woman that was caught into adultery, a prime example of how he didn't go, those that aren't familiar with the story, go and look it up in John. But he did not condemn the woman, neither did he condone what she had done. And he said, I don't condemn you, but go and sin no more. Just this supreme example of showing compassion, but within God's boundaries. Yeah, but it's a tension, and it's something we have to, I've had to work through myself, and
most sort of valuable things in life are held in tension, aren't they? And that's it's if the gospel is about keeping the 10 commandments and Jesus is teaching perfectly, then I've never met anybody who's getting in.
No.
We all fall short, and I think that's such an important part of the gospel, but part of the gospel that we often forget to emphasize at times, particularly around some of these key issues, that we forget that it is a place, the church is a place for those who have fallen short, but it's a place where those boundaries can still be taught as life and truth, and but also knowing full well that, I was reflecting the other day and thinking, I sat around a table and we were chatting about different, as you do, different sort of big issues, big topics in Christianity and things, and just realizing that none of us really know what somebody else at that table is going through. Somebody had opened up to me about something, and we went on to a topic, and I just thought, wow, how does that person feel with what we're sort of philosophically chatting through it, but it isn't theory for this person. They're walking through it in their life, and I think we always need to be aware of that, don't we, whilst talking about truth, talking about boundaries, but being very aware that we do not know what someone, even opposite a meal, let alone in a church of whatever many gather in, all the different experiences that people have faced.
Well, 1 in 3 women in the UK will have had an abortion by the time they're 45 now. That's 1 in 3. And so logically, there will be women in our churches and in our circle who have experiences. So you never assume when you're talking to somebody, I know you would, that they haven't had this experience. And some of the stories I have heard in some of our post-abortion group, I had one lady who came and shared this most horrific story of childhood, of really just deprivation and lack of any role model, any love, and then having to abortion. And she said to me, Jenny, you must think I'm horrible. I said, I just can't believe that you're still here and you're still functioning and that you've come, and God loves you. So it's to do with grace, isn't it? All about grace.
So how do we maybe as a church become more welcoming? It'd be nice to touch on the things we say, maybe, but for those who face miscarriage, stillbirth, and maybe particularly abortion, but for all of those, how do we become, and I'd love to get, some stories from you of churches that are doing it well, maybe, people we can aspire to, and what can we do to do that better? Well,
I think we've already made a good start, actually, and I think you have in Amblecote, and I think you're a church that's doing it well, actually, Tim. Because we're on this journey, and when I came and spoke, I just sensed very much that lovely sort of atmosphere of acceptance, and so we're beginning to talk about this, and we've already said, being aware that there will be those in church who've gone through this. I think we can make it a more welcoming place by actually, and this can be a challenge, as we've just said, the whole thing about compassion and boundaries and grace and truth, but actually making it part of our teaching programs. So talking about miscarriage and pregnancy loss, and in particular about abortion, that this is a subject. So if somebody went onto our website as a church and they saw we've got a seminar on this, or this week, it could be part of teaching. I know there's a challenge, there's so much to do and address in a church, but they think, oh, this is the kind of place where they talk about it. And it's not in the same way as we do debt counselling or relationship counselling. This is just one of those subjects that we talk about. I think that can be really helpful. And just encouraging pastoral teams and individuals, if they know of somebody who's been through this. Really what most women and partners want is just the opportunity to talk, I think, and to talk and just giving that opportunity, not expecting them to move on straight away. I think that can be something that we can do. I mentioned the baby remembrance services. I know as a church, churches can't do everything, but for me, I'm really sold on these. And I think that they are wonderful opportunities. I've been involved with several now where people are just invited to come and remember their babies. It's fairly formal. We have some music and readings at the end. There's an opportunity to light a candle and to take a flower home, and just, it's actually given dignity to that loss. And why I love it so much is that most of the services that we've done, I would say 90% of those who come normally would never walk through the doors of a church. And they come because they want to remember their babies, and that's what we're focused on. But actually they also hear about God's love as well. And I think all those things just add to our environment, don't they, and help. And just last week, actually, I was reading an article by somebody who'd suffered 2 stillbirths, and she is an ordained person. She's in children's ministry, which is quite difficult for her at times. But she just encouraged us on there to have a look what in our church ministry, what parts of our ministry really focus on birth metaphors, so family, parenting, things that sort of focus on that, the celebration of childhood and family life as a sign of community and renewal. Or even at Christmas, it's all to do with the baby, and maybe what can be done to open up some of those spaces. And it's quite complex, I think, and a challenge, but for those who've experienced baby loss in whatever form, it can be really difficult. So just to think a little bit about that as well. How can we open up the conversations there?
Yeah. It's definitely something that because I think some of this is about building it into the life of the church and the church family. And I know one of the things that came out of our little journey on this was just a simple thing, at dedications, is just having a moment in there to recognise that there are those that have lost babies and have a short time of prayer. It's very simple, you might not even notice it if you're not looking for it. It's not a hard thing to do, but I think it's an acknowledgement of we're celebrating this baby, and yet there are those that will be painful for, and it's good to pray for them, stand with them, and come to God in that moment. That's a very simple, literally is 3 lines. But I think it can be powerful in the life, the rhythms of the church. Really.
And for those who've experienced that, but also making those aware in the church, yes, we do need to remember this, and those people who've been through it will have noticed it, even if it was only 3 minutes.
Exactly.
So,
and I think that's what we're trying to do, is sort of get it on our lips and get it talked about, and in a very, ground up way, from, on the ground. So, and I think one of my, what I've recognised is often it's people want to talk to a friend or someone they're close to almost before, they'll reach out sometimes. And I think the more that all of us become aware of these and can guide those that come to us, it might be a friend that comes to you who says, oh, this happened, or I've had this experience. The more informed we all are, the more we can help and support one another in that.
And I know, Tim, I sent over to you, I think just last week, I've been emailing a lot of churches about some pastoral training events that we have. I don't know if this is the right place to mention that.
Go for it,
But we have some pastoral training events coming up, actually October, I've got the date, the 3rd and the 5th. And we started doing these actually in lockdown as lunchtime sessions, just over an hour. So asking for a friend, how can I help a friend who's had a miscarriage? How can I help a friend who's struggling following abortion? And then we've done also, how can I help a friend who's facing a crisis pregnancy? And of course, that might just be for a friend, but it's also for all of us to know, how can we help those who've been through those? So I think you were going to put it out in your church.
We are,
notices and stuff, just to encourage people. We're now doing them in the evening. I think with lockdown, we're almost back to normal with working. And so we're just going to do them on a Monday and a Wednesday evening, just an hour and a half. And they're really lovely, informal sessions, and would really encourage anyone to come and to share with that, You
may have just said so those are online, is that right?
They're online.
Online, so you can access them at home.
Yes, I think you've got the link there. You can just register on Eventbrite. Just come on. It's on Zoom, and you can say as little or as you don't have to say anything. And we say, because it's so sensitive for people who want to have their screens turned off, that's fine as well. But generally, they have just been really lovely sessions that we're continuing. I
was just going to ask that actually. Someone might be feeling like, oh, am I going to be asked to talk about my experience or my friend's experience, or is it more they can just hide if they want to? Is that...
Absolutely, and we make a point of saying that at the beginning, that it is sensitive. and there's no pressure on anyone, to speak. And actually most of it is me and my colleague chatting, there's not a lot, but they really are. We've had such great positive response, so would encourage anyone to come and just learn.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, I think that sort of brings us to the end. We've talked quite a bit about further support for those that are listening. Is there anything else you'd want to add into that, Jenny? But I think we've given
I think if people want to know anything more, please, should I give my email address here?
Yeah.
I'll put it up. So it's open@care.org.uk. So, and it's only me that accesses it. It's a care, but it's only me that accesses that. So open@care.org.uk. If anyone has any questions, wants any more information, please do. Have we overrun our time, Tim?
You can no. We've got if you've got more to share. I
know you did ask me about a church that's done something well.
Yes.
And when I was thinking about that, I just wanted to share this lovely story to end on a positive note. I think that.
I haven't asked about things we should and shouldn't say as well.
Okay. Well, how about if people? But I mean, we have a definite section on that, on the asking for a friend.
Okay.
Where we talk about that more in depth. I think it might be good to come to that rather.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. We can pick that up
just
there.
To make sure people come then.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
But just a while ago, I just thought, I was thinking about this, I'm going to share about that. So I was in the south of England doing a pastoral training session, and somebody came up to me and talking about how we don't talk about abortion very much, and how as churches we don't deal very well sometimes, not all churches, but with crisis pregnancy and all the rest of it. And she came up to me and she just said, Jenny, that's really true, but can I tell you about my daughter? And she told me that her daughter, 30, 40 years before, had been at a youth group, really involved in the church. She'd been to the youth group, and on the way back from the youth group, this is very sensitive, sorry, but on the way back, she was raped. And as a result of that, she became pregnant, which doesn't often happen for all sorts of reasons, but she became pregnant. And so, of course, she wrestled with that. What should she do? And had advice from both sides. I've never been raped. None of us are there to judge or to tell somebody what to do, and had lots of advice. But in the end, this lovely young lady decided that for her, she felt it was right to carry on with the pregnancy. And so she made that decision to carry on with the pregnancy. And this lady at this lunch that I was speaking at said, Jenny, from that moment on, she said, that baby became the church baby. And she said, from that moment on, we didn't have to buy any equipment. We didn't have to buy any nappies. Everybody came around and provided for that baby. And I think I might have told you the story before, Tim. But anyway, at the dedication service that we were talking about for that baby as a little girl, when the pastor said, and who will be raising this child? I always get wobbly. The whole church stood, because they were there to raise that child. And she said, that's what happened. That child was surrounded with love. And that child now, that little girl, she has grown, and she's now working in ministry in Australia, actually.
Wow.
And God, these things God doesn't bring to us, but he can redeem these sadnesses. And I always think that is an example of a church that really dealt with that situation, that crisis pregnancy, and all the support afterwards really well. So I love local church. I'm a great believer in it. And we have the ethos of grace and compassion to do these things well. And we do. So, yeah.
Wow. What a fantastic note to finish on. I think that's a good place. Was there anything else you wanted to say, or are you happy?
I think we've probably covered. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've covered a lot there. It's been great chatting. And
it's not the end. I'm sure we can do another one at some point. Just for all of those who are part of our church family, just say this is an ongoing journey. We're not saying that we've arrived. We're not saying we're particularly good at this, but it is something that's certainly on my heart, and I think a number of other people in our church family, that we want to see this grow. So if you've experienced this and you need support, do reach out. You can reach Jenny on the email. You can email any of the pastoral team, the leaders. But also you might want to visit the board at the back of the main hall if you sort of want to grab a leaflet and reach out there. But also, if you've got a passion for this whole area, get in touch as well. You can email me. My email is timb@amblecote.christiancentre.org.uk. Well, it currently is, but it's going to change soon, but I won't go into that. But it's timb@amblecote.christiancentre.org.uk. And please do reach out. And if you've got ideas, passion, thoughts and things that we could do as a church, do get in touch. So
Tim, sorry, could I just say I haven't mentioned our website? That's a
yes.
bit, yeah. So it's weareopen.org.uk, and lots
Great.
of information on there. And I think we've been chatting as well a little bit about whether within the Stourbridge area, whether we could think about hosting a love retreat day, a healing retreat day, and I would love to come and help facilitate that. So that's another step on the journey, isn't it, that we're just thinking about. For anybody interested in that, please let me know.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate you. Appreciate your ministry and what God's doing in you and through you. And thank you for giving us your time today. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.